Welcome back to the 1-0 Pod. I'm Seth Engle,
I'm Zach Allen.
and we are just days away from the blue-white game, culmination of spring practice. It's all coming to an end right now. Still a bunch of position battles going on here. We talked to Franklin yesterday and went to practice as well, so we'll cover all that today, as well as some NIL comments he made. I know this has been a big topic of discussion, especially with Micah Shrewsbury, in the midst of his exit at Penn State, and then some big commits we'll go through. So let's start off with the blue-white game itself, because we're coming
to
off
Beaver Stadium, baby.
Exactly. We're coming off a year last year where that was basically just a live practice.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case at all, this year.
I mean, during our practice yesterday, when he spoke to us, he said it's going back to the normal format. And it was interesting because when we would talk to the players, they're like, COVID was the year before, so we didn't really see it. So some of the players don't even know what the normal format is, right. And they're just excited for the surprise and to be back in Beaver Stadium and to kind of maybe help settle some of those competition battles that you alluded to.
For sure. And some of those battles, I think we should mention here, we're looking at the depth at defensive tackle, one. We're looking at wide receiver, 3. So far, we know that Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace III are going to be, the 1 and 2, at least until Dante Cephas gets to campus, whenever that may be. But for the rest of the room, that's still an ongoing competition, and we're really not sure who is, in the lead right now. Trey Wallace likes Amari Evans. He gave him, a little nod yesterday in his avail. But there's some other names that could pop up. Malik McClain, maybe the transfer from Florida State, and some of these other guys. So, what are you kind of looking for when you look at a wide receiver competition, especially in terms of the blue-white scrimmage?
I feel like almost every name has been thrown all over the place by certain players. I know James has told us just everybody is competing for the third wide receiver spot, whether that's true or not. But like you said, I think just development at this point. I feel like wide receiver last year, after Keandre at the third spot, there wasn't a whole lot of experience. Trey Wallace kind of stepped it up last season. And so I think that's going to be the case this season again. Obviously, Malik McClain,
right.
Huge guy, deep threat. Caden Saunders is another guy. I feel like someone said Liam Clifford the other day.
Yeah, I've heard his name as well.
And like you said earlier, Amari Evans has been, I think, probably the number one name we've heard. He was kind of a raw prospect when he originally stepped on campus last season, but, he's fast. With the right development, and it sounds like he's getting it, he could, kind of maybe earn some reps here.
Yeah, Amari's a guy to me that you have your X and your Z, which are likely to be Wallace and Lambert-Smith. Evans is a guy to me you just put in the slot, and he's so fast that, it's just bound to work out well for you. We already saw him connect a little bit with Drew Aller the year, last season as a freshman. Played a lot more than I think anyone expected he would. Burnt his red shirt, which was crazy. So we'll see him. Amari Evans definitely a name to keep an eye on. As for defensive tackle, we know Devon Ellies, Hakeem Beamon, and Zane Durant are going to have big roles, in the interior D-line this year. But that depth has been a question, whether because of injuries or not. Franklin's mentioned that there have been some bumps and bruises from winter workouts to spring practice. So we'll see, exactly who's available to play, and then kind of take it from there in terms of how we're going to evaluate that room.
Yeah, going back to the Michigan game last season, when Franklin said, we want a physical guy, and that sometimes people think they're Aaron Donald when they're not. So I feel like defensive tackle is probably maybe the biggest position battle probably going on right now in Franklin's eyes. I know during practices, Zane Durant has just been a constant name that has been picked up. And I know some injuries have kept some guys out, but it sounds like he's really coming along. It sounds like he's more explosive getting off the ball, but he also put on, as Franklin says, good weight this offseason.
I think the reality is in today's world of college football, and even in the NFL, you win games in the trenches.
Yeah.
So that's on the offensive and defensive side on the ball on both lines there. Penn State's offensive line, as we know, is pretty good right now. I mean, they're in a pretty great spot, have great depth, star-studded in certain spots there. But the D-line, to me, is that big question mark of, is this team really going to compete for a playoff this year? Because the other teams in the country, the most competitive teams that are in the playoffs every single year or at least competing for a conference championship, I mean, they have great lines on both sides.
Yeah.
So we saw Michigan last year, I think, is a good example of a team that's really stepped up their play on both sides of the trenches. Like, Michigan's D-line is massive, and their O-line, is also just as consistent. So something to look for. Another thing I think is pretty obvious that a lot of people are going to be excited to watch for is quarterbacks.
I mean, that's the case every season.
Yeah.
Bo Perbula has obviously made a name for himself. We don't quite know what his role exactly will be, whether it's Tommy Stevens, maybe not even really getting that much playing time at all,
right,
or if he's just how much of a competition there is. I mean, I think the job's definitely Drew's. I mean, that's why he played in 9 games last season.
They played in 10, including the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, there you go. So I think the job's his. I don't know about what your thoughts are on the whole situation.
Well, my thoughts are this. I mean, I think it's still really early. I mean, Drew is going to be the starting quarterback week 1. I'm not, bearing something unforeseen, Drew Aller is going to start week 1. I have no question about that in my mind. The thing that I'm going to look for this weekend is, okay, well, how has Drew developed since the last spring game? Because I don't know if you remember, I mean, he didn't look too great.
Good. No.
It wasn't great. And we saw him throughout the year, but we didn't see a Drew Aller offense. What I'm going to look for right now is okay, how has Mike Yurcich actually tuned his playbook to Drew Aller's play style? And how is that going to play out in this game? And we'll see if they show us, they're probably not going to give away all the secrets. That's something I'm looking forward to seeing for sure.
I think you bring up a great point because all offseason Drew's been saying, I think this is the best defense in the nation. And they're constantly practicing against each other. And like you talked about last spring game, he had, I think, 2 interceptions.
Yeah, he did.
Probably should have been a third in there. It was just not what I think people were anticipating early on. But then as, we got more playing time, albeit probably in mostly garbage time when the games were put away, he wasn't really playing the best his opposing teams could put out. And so I'm very excited to see what he can do against this deep Penn State secondary, these linebackers, these edge rushers. I mean, he's complimented them all and how they all kind of made him better as a quarterback.
So when I look at it and I look at blue versus white, I mean, I'm really looking at Bo Perbula versus Drew Aller here. We know they're completely different play styles. We've heard that. We've seen it in practice. But what exactly is that going to look like? What is Bo going to bring to the table, and what is a Drew Aller ran offense going to look like? And also, I want to look at Jackson Smolik a little bit because we've heard some good things. We know he's a lot smaller. He's also young, but I think he can use the legs, and we'll see how that arm looks as well. So those are all good things to look for. We talked to Franklin yesterday, going to change topics a little bit here. I mean, usually before the spring game, you go through all the units. Okay, how are the competitions? What's going on? We hit all those, and then it flipped over to NIL.
At the very end.
At the very end, and Franklin went on this tangent where he's talking about where Penn State was in NIL, where they are now, and how that shapes up, amongst the best teams in the country, which I thought was really interesting. So, I mean, Franklin said basically Penn State was 2 years behind in NIL. Those first 2 years, in 2021 and 2022, they were behind everyone else because the university was teaching these athletes how to be entrepreneurs on their own instead of just getting them these marketing deals like every other program. Mm-hmm. Now it looks like they're up to speed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this was a talking point last season too, kind of a little bit. He never really sounded that passionate about it as he did yesterday. And I thought it was interesting too. He also talked about Micah Shrewsbury a little bit.
Which was very surprising to me.
Yeah, and
brought that up.
Yeah, I really didn't expect that too. And, you see, like, I think a couple weeks ago, Jay Paterno and Michael Motti kind of going at it on Twitter over NIL. I still think Penn State has some work to do in that space. Obviously, there's like three different collectives, major collectives. And Franklin did say they've made some progress in that space since last season and that they're kind of catching up, but they still have some work to do. I'm just really curious to see what will happen in that space as the season goes on, next season, season after that, because it's not really a secret anymore. You have to have successful NIL to be successful in college football.
Yeah, we're well past the point of, okay, do you agree with paying college athletes or not? We're well past that. Like, this is how it's happening right now. If you're a fan of a college football team, you better hope that university is pouring money into NIL and pouring a lot of time and effort, because that's the only way that football games are going to be won.
Or even like fans can start donating now.
Yeah.
It's just complete switch of the landscape, and I think Franklin kind of touched on that. It doesn't matter anymore what your stance is. That's just what it takes to be successful.
For sure, and I'll see people in like my comment section. If I bring up like an NIL thing, people are like, just tell Franklin to win games. Stop worrying about NIL. It's like, dude, you're not understanding the fact that these cross paths. Like, it's the same thing when Franklin all these years would talk about facility upgrades and staff sizes. In alignment with the university. It's the same exact thing. It's just a new topic now.
Yeah.
Like, he's brought this up so many times where you have to compete 365 days a year in every single facet of the sport. Like, that's how you win football games.
And
is by not just competing in game matchups, but by competing in literally every single category.
And he's achieved the facilities now.
Yeah.
Lash building's beautiful, huge weight room. And now, because of that, they have the whole indoor football practice field as a separate facility on top of their other practice field outside.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's already kind of checked that off the box, so now he can start shifting more of his focus to the NIL space, and we'll see where he takes that.
Yeah, I mean, the Lash building is $48 million renovation. It, like you said, looks great. The staff sizes, like, there's a reason, one, that Penn State was able to bring in coordinators like Mike Yurcich and Manny Diaz, but two, be able to retain them. Because Manny Diaz, he got looks this offseason. He didn't have to come back. Like, I know there were some rumors with Florida Atlantic and stuff, but, like, he could have gone somewhere else. He's waiting on the opportunity because Penn State, is not like the worst place to be a coordinator.
It's not out of
They're gonna throw you good money to assistant coach your team. But anyway, so that was a big thing, and then the whole Shrewsbury situation, which was really interesting that he brought up, because Jay Paterno has publicly stated that there's no way for Shrewsbury to have even known the total or ranking that Penn State is in the Big Ten. Shrewsbury said it was 13 or 14 in the whole conference. Paterno said, there's no way to even tell that.
And that, he filled every NIL request possible.
Yeah, and it's just like Franklin straight up said yesterday, like, we know that we know NIL was a part of it. So that was definitely something. But anyway, we talked about facility upgrades. Franklin mentioned how recruits are already like
filling in.
They're already like jaw dropped, and they love the new renovation. I mean, it's beautiful. We've seen it. It looks great. But we're already seeing that kind of pay off a little bit, and maybe as well, NIL could be playing a part in recruiting right now. I mean, we don't know specifics on that, but I mean, Penn State's been making a splash in the recruiting trail for 2024. Quentin Martin committed last week. He's the number one player in Pennsylvania. And then Antoine Belgrave Shorter, the cornerback, committed 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And he's a teammate of John Mitchell. Those are from Jacksonville, Florida. Like, Penn State is dipping their toes in the water down south while recruiting in state. So.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to the whole recruiting thing. Last few practices have been beautiful, and you look up on the upper deck, and it's just families and recruits. But those three guys that you mentioned, Quentin Martin especially, I mean, he's a huge pickup. He's a great athlete. I mean, I don't know where he's going to play once he steps on campus. It could be defensive back, but he's also been a great high school running back. He had 22 touchdowns last year, 1,200 rushing yards. I think defensively he had 4 interceptions.
Yeah.
I mean, his athlete categorization is perfect, I think, for him.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at him, this is the first, because I've seen this guy's film like
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. The first thing I saw was, okay, well, this guy is 100% the best dual threat athlete from the state of Pennsylvania since Micah Parsons. It's hands down for me. I mean, he's incredible if you watch his film. It starts off, if you watch the huddle, it starts off with his defensive back play, and then slowly it transitions into him returning these kickoffs, and then he starts rushing. And I'm like, this kid can literally play any position, and we don't know. We don't know where he's going to be. You can put him at DB. Penn State already has now, 3 other defensive backs already committed in their 2024 class. So he can join them if he wants. He can play corner or safety. Mm-hmm. Or, you see Nick Singleton and Katron Allen maybe leaving for the NFL in a couple years. Quentin Martin could be, the next running back at Penn State. So it's really open-ended right now, which is exactly, where James Franklin and his staff love to have recruits. You hear all the time, position flexibility. That's the ultimate flexibility guy right there. He can play anywhere.
And going back to the huddle tape, he runs very north and south. I feel like sometimes these kids going fresh into college kind of go east and west and try and juke their way, but he just gets straight to the point, runs through people, and he's like 6'2". Yeah. I mean, if you see when he gets to campus and he hits, again, the Lash building, and he puts on that good weight that some players this season have already done, like Tony Rojas gained 30 pounds already. Who knows what he could be? And
they'll tune that to where they decide to play him. But it's way too early right now to say. Because he's so good at both. But it says a lot about where Penn State is, the fact that they're recruiting this well, especially in the state of Pennsylvania. Because now with Quentin Martin committing, the past 3 number 1 players in the state have all committed to Penn State. So you had Nick Singleton 2 years ago, Javen Williams last year, and now Quentin Martin. I mean, that says a ton, especially when James Franklin's whole thing, when he got hired, best in state, stay in state. So here we are now.
He's keeping up to his word.
He's keeping up to his word with a lot of things. I think there was a point with the university where they weren't seeing eye to eye on certain things, where the team was playing well and Franklin wanted things to move forward. And they didn't necessarily do that in 2016 or 2017. But now that this recent success is occurring, I mean, they're going full force right now.
And like you said, in Florida, too, they're kind of getting into new markets. Florida, obviously, is one of the best.
Alabama's another state, yeah.
And recently, New Jersey, too, they've started to gain some more traction.
And the New Jersey thing, too, also goes back to the staff sizes, where they brought in these guys with these New Jersey backgrounds who can then bring in these widen their recruiting base. That's happened this offseason. So it's literally, it goes back to Franklin, putting it all on the table, saying we need this, we need this, we need this to be successful. And now you're starting to see that kind of come to fruition. So it's all coming together.
Yeah, I think the horizon's bright.
I think honestly. It is. But it all starts with this blue and white game on Saturday. So,
and then West Virginia.
And then West Virginia a while back. But so we got a long way to go. Thank you for joining us. Want to Know Pod, follow us along at collegian.psu.edu online and at Twitter at Want to Know Pod and Collegian Footblog.